Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tarnished Bronze. Now, here we have a really special issue, Legion of Superheroes #4, The Tale of Mon-El. This is 5 years later. And Patrick, before you get started, I just want to wind you up and let you go. But this story does a lot of heavy lifting. We get a lot of the 5 year later plot just punching through here. And we also have a lot of editorial bullshit to deal with. So
Yeah, a
take it
lot.
away, my friend. This is brought to us by
There's,
Keith Giffen, the Bierbaums and Gordon, and Patrick is going to give us a tour de force on Mon-El.
yeah, I have to explain what's happening. Full disclosure, Mon-El has been my favorite Legionnaire since childhood. So, along with Saturn Girl and Brainiac 5, but Mon-El's absolutely my favorite. So, this is a great issue for me. That said, not necessarily my favorite cover. Kind of looks like he's lost a lot of weight. And or he's wearing his dad's outfit. I don't really know. But again, it was the
The
early
sleeves are
90s.
puffy, like that Seinfeld episode. He's got the
He
puffy
he always
shirt.
had the tight cuffs and sort of a looser sleeve, and you can see I actually just noticed before we went to air, as they say, that they even show the clasps in his collar where it's undone. But yeah, it's just a bit of volume there. But anyway. Issue opens with Shadowlass. She is on Taluk 8, which is a desert planet, and she's being replaced as the planetary protector. So her lineage inherit their mystic shadow powers from this cave that her cousin and she discovered when they were kids. And so her cousin Grev, who used to be called Shadow Lad, he was in the Legion Academy. He's replacing her as the planetary protector. She's been preoccupied with mourning Mon-El after his apparent death during the battle with the Time Trapper, which you're aware of because that was during the Levitz run, which at this point was probably um, maybe a couple of years earlier. So Mon-El really hasn't been seen since then. And I love you love world building as much as I do. We're really delving into Taluk 8, what it looks like, the sort of desert look, and what people look like when they mourn. So she's got this full face mask on, which was really cool. And here we can see her, she's playing this interesting
Right.
instrument when her longtime lover from the 70s. I mean, these people have been together for 20 years. He shows up completely naked, and wow, she must be shocked. I mean, this has been 5 years plus that she's thought that he's been dead. She's still mourning, so that tells you something right there, I guess. And he shows up. Now, meanwhile, Brainiac 5 is working on a cure for the Validus plague that we discussed when we covered issue number 3. And he's trying to figure this out so that Saturn Girl and Lightning Lad's son, Garridan, can be released from his bubble and not infect everyone with the Validus plague. And that's when Mon-El and Shadowlass show up seeking his help because apparently Mon-El has come to realize that the time trapper's consciousness is actually trapped within his mind. So they need to find some way to remove the time trapper from his brain. Now, this is where things get complicated, and I'm going to go back into the annals of Legion history to explain what is going on here. And again, if you were just being introduced to this, I think it would be really confusing. So the Beerbombs and Keith Giffen, but I've gotten I've gotten the feeling from reading stuff online and interviews and stuff that maybe this was more of a Beerbombs thing. They're revisiting a tale from the Silver Age of the Legion, namely the Lament for a Lost Legionnaire. No, Lament for a Legionnaire. It's from Adventure Comics 384 from January 1970, written by Jim Shooter, not when he was 11 or 14. He was a little bit older by now. In that issue, Dream Girl, whose predictions, as crazy as they seem and as kooky as they may turn out, are always right, right? They're always correct in some manner, but sometimes just not in the way that we think, right? She sees Mon-El die, maybe it's somebody that looks like Mon-El or etc. So we've had this trope before where Dream Girl dreams up something crazy and we think this cannot happen, and then we find out how it could be true, even though it wasn't necessarily what we thought it was. So in this one, she foresees Mon-El's death. In order to prevent this, Mon-El, who, as you remember, is actually from our time, right? He's spent 1,000 years in the Phantom Zone, so he has descendants in the future. And one of those is Eltro, who is a descendant of, I think, Mon-El's brother. So Eltro has somehow found out that Mon-El is set to die, so he knocks Mon-El out and takes his place in order to sacrifice himself for Mon-El.
Yeah, what a
Unfortunately,
champion! Like,
right?
yeah,
Yeah, but this is very much another Legion trope, right? People sacrificing their lives for others. The ultimate heroic sacrifice. You know, I mean, what more can you give, right? You gave up the office, but did you give your life? So Mon-El, while he's knocked out, his lead poisoning, which was not permanent at that time. So during the Levitz era, maybe sometime in the 70s, his cure for lead poisoning became permanent and not something that he had to take on a monthly basis, weekly basis, whatever it was. So his lead poisoning antidote wears off and he dies. So Eltro is obviously completely upset about this. And to be fair, I think Eltro maybe knew that if he took Mon-El's place, then since he wasn't Mon-El, he wouldn't die. Um, but he does take Mon-El's dead body back to this high-tech machine where he's able to transfer his life force into Mon-El and save him at the expense of his own life, and Mon-El is back to life. That's what really happened. Now, I mean, right, so it's already convoluted. Now, 20 years later, almost exactly 20 years later, that story is retconned by the Bierbaums and Giffen, and they say Mon-El actually was not dead. Even though he had no pulse, his consciousness and his life force was still intact because, you know, he's a super Daxamite. And that when Eltro transferred his life force, he actually transferred his life force and his consciousness into Mon-El's mind. And so they've been living together in Mon-El's brain for all this time, and that this explains Mon-El's personality changes that happened in the ensuing years. Now, being a huge Mon-El fan, I didn't really think that his personality changed that much. Now, Levitz had him have some reactions to being in the Phantom Zone for 1,000 years, which people kind of glossed over and acted like was just nothing. You know, this man has seen,
yeah, that's
yeah,
a beautiful story of how he just like a shocking way to live. Like that's going to affect you just profoundly.
you
Um,
see every person you know die, right? Because you can see from the Phantom Zone, you live 1,000 years, which humans really aren't made to live that long.
not equipped for.
Yeah, and when you know, I'm actually, I think, I don't know if I mentioned on the channel, but I know you know, I'm reading Donny Cates' Thor, and one of the things that comes up multiple times in that storyline is how when you're immortal, time passes differently for you, right? So, you know, everything's sort of a flash, so you don't really remember the things that you've been through and stuff. So Mon-El is a different sort of cat, right? So Levitt's kind of explored that in a really interesting and cool way. And yes, Mon-El had some outbursts that were related to those sorts of things where Levitz was trying to tease out the depths of Mon-El's personality. Giffen and the Beerbombs have kind of taken that as I guess they're suggesting that that somehow didn't match the canon of what Mon-El's personality was, so that it was actually Eltro's sort of weaker personality that Mon-El's stronger, more valiant personality was succumbing to. I don't know how much I agree with that. So apparently, during Mon-El's final battle with the Time Trapper, during which we think he's killed the Time Trapper and perhaps died himself, The Trapper has projected his own consciousness into Mon-El's mind as well, uh, in order to save himself from destruction. So in Mon-El's brain now we have Largand, the normal Mon-El, we have the Time Trapper, and we also have his descendant Eltro. Well, during Mon-El's long dormancy of 5 years after that, it seems like the melding of Mon-El and Eltro has become undone. And so there's sort of three different separate consciousnesses in his brain. And then at some point, somehow the time trapper, while he's in the brain, is able to dismiss Eltro altogether. And that actually happens, I think, in this issue where the Eltro personality kind of just fades away. Now, this brings us to where we come in here, which is a perfect display of Brainiac Five's brilliance, is that he detects Mon-El's mind, the impulse, as he calls it. He sees the background, which is the time trapper, and he also sees the faint remnants of the Eltro mind. And so he gets to work trying to separate the time trapper from Mon-El, because obviously we can't have one of the Legion's biggest villains living in the head of one of the Legion's strongest members. Now, spoiler alert, this is the same type of retcon that the Bierbaums and Giffen will eventually use on Lightning Lad as well, because as longtime Legion readers know, Lightning Lad also died and went through a process where somebody sacrificed their life force in order to bring him back to life. In this instance, it was Chameleon Boy's sentient pet, Proti 1, who did it. And that one, I feel like the Mon-El one was kind of glossed over a bit, mainly because at the end of this, we end up with a Mon-El that we've always known with his brain patterns intact. With Lightning Lad, we sort of end up with Saturn Girl being married to and having children with someone's sentient pet. That didn't go over as well. It's a little bit stickier. I don't know how they explain. I guess since Lightning Lad wasn't a super strong Daxamite, maybe they couldn't say, oh, he was still alive, right? And so Prody just was living inside Lightning Lad's head with him. It was more like, no, he replaced him. So some of the fans glommed onto that and they support it wholeheartedly. Some of them really don't. I'm kind of fall into the second camp. I don't really. Saturn Girl is one of the most powerful telepaths
I
in
think
the
she'd know.
universe. She probably would pick up, and that's what they say. And I feel like that's maybe written in the subtext is that Saturn Girl knew. But in that case, yeah, it all makes it a little bit weird. But we'll get to that when we get to that. But I thought I might as well throw that in. I know I'm talking a lot, but this is a very confusing issue for those not initiated into the deep Legion lore, and for this to be the fourth issue of the new run is kind of crazy. Once Brainiac succeeds in separating their consciousnesses, Mon-El and the Time Trapper snatches Mon-El from the timeline and brings him to his lair, which is the end of time. So this desolate Earth hellscape, and they have a battle. And during that battle, the Time Trapper explains the Pocket Universe. So if you weren't confused before, you're really going to be confused now. So the Pocket Universe was created actually by Levitz in Legion of Superheroes number 23, which came out in June of 1983. So about 3 years prior to this issue. And the purpose of the Pocket Universe was to explain how there could be no Superboy in our current continuum where John Byrne has reinvented Superman and there is no Superboy. Superman was never a hero when he was a child. So there is no Superboy. And if there's no Superboy, then who inspired the Legion to form? Because that's what we've always known is that the Legion was inspired by the exploits of Superboy. Here's an idea. They're 1,000 years in the future. Maybe history was not kept so great because we have this in the Levitz era, we have this time period um, where there was apparently some sort of nuclear world war and a lot of the records are erased. So that's used to explain why the Legion don't know a lot of things from the 20th century. So I feel like they could have easily used that so that Superboy becomes sort of a Robin Hood or a King Arthur character, right? And we can still be inspired by that, but maybe it doesn't back up with the actual
He,
historical.
They come
relevance, right?
again when the world is in need of heroes.
Exactly. So instead of doing that, we come up with this convoluted thing where the time trapper creates a copy of the universe called the Pocket Universe, where he creates a Superboy, and that every time the Legion was traveling into the past, they weren't traveling into the past of their own planet. They were actually being shunted off into this Pocket Universe, right? I actually love those issues. I thought the Pocket Universe explanation was brilliant. I thought it was a great way to explain, what was going on, to leave Superboy as part of the Legion, but not have him be part of Superman. What do
Also,
you
it
think?
allows for mad villainy. Like, that's the amazing part of it. Like, the whole legion of superheroes, the guy responsible for them is the villain. That's what makes it so cool.
Doesn't it? And it changed the Time Trapper to being, honestly, when I was a kid, and I was reading the tiny little digests with the tiny little print that I probably couldn't even read anymore. The Time Trapper was a cool villain, but he wasn't really used necessarily to his greatest extent, in my opinion. This really gave the Time Trapper some teeth, in my opinion, and raised the stakes, as we like to say. So I was a fan of the Pocket Universe. You've read those issues. What did you think about the Pocket Universe and the eventual death of the Pocket Universe Superboy?
I'm a big fan of Superboy being the paragon that the Legion of Superheroes hold themselves up to. And a beautiful thing is don't always meet your heroes, but if you can work with them, that's a great thing to be able to do. Now, I don't like how the Pocket Universe meant they never actually worked with the real Superboy. I think you lose something of the joy when you don't have that, but it's the least worst thing that they could come up with. And as a bonus, we got some real teeth to the Time Trapper. So,
Yeah.
in general, I think it's kind of cool. I hate these editorial mandated things like why the Superman editorial verse consider something 2,000 years in the future to be of any concern to anyone in a fictional universe, might I add. Um,
Yes, yes.
is
Why
just,
and what did I write in my notes? A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, Ralph Waldo Emerson. And this, if anything, seems like a foolish consistency. And this coming from someone who is the king of foolish consistencies right
yeah,
here.
yeah.
If anybody can let go of something and say, you know what, let's just relax. This isn't really the biggest thing. It's not going to cause the end of the world. If I can say that, I feel like anybody. Who was that? Was it, I feel like I should know. Who was the editor in chief at this time?
So Jeanette Kahn and even I think Levitz at this time are the chief creative officers and the artist who I really like, who does a lot of inking and the covers for Justice League, Dick Giordano. They sort of do it all together.
I I feel like Dick is the one that's referenced as sort of being the instigator. Now that you say that, I could be wrong. And if so, apologies to all involved. But I feel like as far as the things that you read online, he kind of gets the blame for this, if blame
To
needs to
be
be
fair, he's
laid.
the one who sees all the issues. So in addition to writing and drawing his own stuff, I think he was someone who was like yes or no to the overall actual pages as they came in. So he was the last guy, I think, to see them. Whether he is involved in the editorial at the story genesis point or he had a deal with John Byrne, who was like apparently like a bit of a nutter about his precious. I'm not sure. So, but it just seems unnecessary. As a happy accident, we got the time trapper got juiced. In this current continuity, more Drew seems to be juiced. So now we have both of these guys that are just powered up a little bit. Um, but
Now,
yeah,
if I recall, Byrne now says that he wasn't the driving force behind there being no Superboy. I feel like I've read that. I don't know. One of the things that, and this is not going to come across well, but that's why I'm here. One of the things that I feel like some comic creators may be guilty of. At least that's what sometimes it reads to me, is a little bit of revisionist history with their personal history, in the same way that maybe people in comic books like to revise character history.
Mhm.
I feel like Jim Shooter's done that a little bit. Sometimes I feel like Byrne does that. Chris Claremont, I feel like sometimes has done that. And so that may be a little bit of a revisionist history. Maybe it's not. I mean, I wasn't there. Who's to say what the real truth is? But I think he disavows the fact that he was sort of responsible for this. And I've read a lot of fans say that when defending him. Others are adamant that he did. So maybe the truth falls somewhere in between. But the point is, somewhere between Legion of Superheroes 23 by Levitz in June 1983, and 3 years later with Legion of Superheroes number 4 with Giffen and the Bierbaums,
Or
editorial
86 and
decided,
89.
yeah,
Yeah.
editorial has decided that the Pocket Universe is no longer a valid explanation, that we have to do away with that going forward. So the answer to that is this battle between Mon-El and the Time Trapper, where the Time Trapper explains the Pocket Universe, which Mon-El is aware of. We have learned that, and Superboy has died in the future in a previous issue. Um, that he is solely responsible for the creation of the Legion, and that because of the way he controls time, that if Mon-El destroys the Time Trapper, it will erase the Time Trapper's existence completely from the timeline, which means the Pocket Universe gets erased, which means Pocket Universe Superboy gets erased, which means the Legion never forms. So by destroying the Time Trapper, Mon-El will be in fact destroying the Legion and their entire timeline. And Mon-El thinks about it maybe for a second and says, you know what? This is something that I need to do. The ultimate hero flex, he says, if it's not us, somebody else will rise to stop you. Now, we also find out in this, which is setting up the future issues, which is what you were saying, that the whole purpose of the Time Trapper creating the Legion was to prevent a timeline where Mordru controlled the galaxy or the universe, right? So apparently, in the normal timeline, Mordru is completely ascendant. Nobody can handle his magic powers. Time Trapper can't compete with him. Time Trapper is seen sort of as the technological avatar and sort of on that side of things, whereas Mordru's on the magical side. And magic has been transcendent, and Mordru has controlled over the universe. The only people that can kind of prevent that are this legion of superheroes that the Time Trapper then conspires via the Pocket Universe to create. But Mon-El says, "Well, somebody else will rise up to do it then, because you're going down, buddy." And so, with one cataclysmic punch, he erases the Time Trapper and the entire time stream, and everything's rebooted. And that's how it ends.
Which is, I think we have vision of that in our document. Yeah, so here's the more showdown. Whoops, sorry. Oh, and this is like that final thing. Just beautiful stuff. Beautiful, beautiful stuff.
I am very confused why this came up when it did, right? So when we were doing issues 1, 2, and 3, I couldn't help but think, and the way that issues 5, 6, and 7 build off this, whether 1, 2, and 3 were humming along, there was a certain plan, there was like a path going forward, and then this is thrown in the mix because it feels wedged in. And or if this was the plan from the very beginning, and then in that case, was it maybe just too dense to start off with? Because it
I don't
seems like
know.
a decent starting off place. What do you think?
Now that we've finally got here, I would have started with this. I would have had a double-sized issue teasing some of the stuff in the front and the back matter of the first 3 issues, and then gone, oh, by the way, everything that you knew about Legion of Superheroes is a lie. And then we're ending on this like flash of light. And then we go from there. And we'll be covering the first like year of 5 years later. And it'll make sense what comes up after this and how that setup is kind of resolved. And these two, as Patrick was mentioning, the clash between science and magic 5 years after the Magic Wars with the Time Trapper and Mordru is actually pretty high stakes. I would have kind of led with that. I would have gone,
Yeah,
how the hell are the Legion going to escape from this Mordru Time Trapper craziness?
and that's why it almost feels like Giffen had started, and then this was sort of forced on him after he had already begun. Maybe not, because I just feel like so much happened during the 5 years that maybe why do we have to have the mess of trying to reform the Legion? We already have the stakes, we already have the villains. We have the Legion being erased and then recreated in time. And here's another thing that points me in that direction. I'm not going to give too much away of what's coming up, but I will say that we go from four, right? Mon-El destroys the timeline, and then in five, we're in the main timeline that the
Yeah.
time trapper was trying to resist. Mordru is ruler of the universe. He is completely ascendant. No one can stand up for him. And in fact, it's been that way for 17 years, we learn. Okay, we see legionnaires that we haven't seen because they've been long dead. Again, I don't want to give too much away. But at the end of six, or at the end of five, that timeline is erased. So we're only there for one issue. And that makes me think that it was never sort of intended. And we go back to now with the changes that editorial has forced on us, but nothing else necessarily really changing. And we're back on course. So it feels it's a great issue. I think it's interesting how they came up with it. There's a lot of things that I love about it, including the fact that it's a Mon-El spotlight. But it feels a little wedged in.
One of the things that makes you think it's already a remix of whatever was already in the pipeline is look at the charisma that's on the page here. You've got Shadow Lass, you've got Brainiac, you've got Mon-El, you've got at least three out of the five Legionnaires that have the Riz going on, right? It seems like they had this ready made. They had some sort of thing where they were going to try and extricate these multiple personalities of Mon-El. Maybe it wasn't necessarily the Time Trapper originally. Like it's pretty easy to draw in some cloaks if you're an artist in a rush. It makes me think that they had this in the background, and then this other editorial thing came down the pike, and they went, okay, we have to futz with things a little bit more because a lot of these panels here could have been trying to extricate, I don't know, Mon-El's personality out of his dead Phantom Zone body or something. A lot of it can still be used. We just changed the text a bit.
It's interesting to me that there are so many other ways to go about this, right? If editorial says Superboy never existed, Supergirl never existed. Okay, well, we're 5 years later. We'll never mention them. We don't have to have Mon-El's dead as far as we know, so he doesn't have to come back to life. If we want to introduce someone that's on his power level, like Laurel Gand, we can do that. She could just be anyone. Like she could be a
I like,
Daxamite.
so no spoilers. I really like Laurel Gand as well. Like, you don't need to have old characters. You can make the a
Yeah.
proxy. And Ursat's Supergirl.
Yeah, and well, and she doesn't have to have any, she doesn't have to have be a proxy for Supergirl. She doesn't have to have any connection to the dead Mon-El. We can just let all of that be in the past, but maybe they really wanted, by this time, Mon-El was already Valor or what? Where is Legion at this time? Legion. Do you know?
I think it might be into the first, definitely not outside the first 10 issues. So in the first
Hmm.
six or so.
So Valor hasn't showed up there.
I don't think so. And that's all just too confusing for me. I haven't actually read those Legion issues. I
I
want to
know that
because I
that's a
love that.
lot.
I
I
love
know
that.
that's a lot, but yeah, there's just so many ways that they could have just ignored it and it would have gone away, I think. But they created a flaming hoop and jumped through it, and it works.
It's so that I'm going to say it again. This succeeds not because of these mandates, but in spite of them.
Hmm. Yes.
I'm the return of Mon-El to the pages of Legion is in my mind a triumph. Like I love this. I love Mon-El. I love Brainiac is getting his pal back, you know. And then as a happy accident, he might knock out one of the major villains in the Legion's life as well. Just a really cool concept. It's Brainiac being Brainiac, not being an Asperger's sort of weirdo. He's, does that make sense to you, Patrick? Like he's not wallowing on Kolu or whatever, just being sad. He's really doing something of material difference. It backfires bigly, as they say. In a couple of issues, we're going to find that the world really shook up on that. But for mine, the pros in this issue is we've got Brainiac. We've got the grid used to really good effect. We've got callbacks in all of those panels to things that we know and love. We've got Legionnaires with real charisma, Legionnaires working as a team, maybe not as the Legion of Superheroes, but the Legionnaires that are in this issue
Mm,
are
themselves,
working
yep.
as a team. And Time Trapper's back, baby. So good. My only con is an opinion editorial con, and I don't think it's the Legion of 5 years later is to blame, but the whole point of the Legion is to hold themselves up to this paragon of behavior and heroism, which is Superboy. Um, and I I don't know if you're making a rod for your own back based on those mid '80s issues, or if it. I don't. I'm sort of wanting to open this up to discussion. Is this a con of this issue, or is it just the fact that the pocket universe was a thing and we kind of have to deal with what we have? I do not want to get into, by the way, making the other the character who wore the Supergirl cape becoming a robot. That infuriates me greatly. I'm not getting into that. I'm just getting into the fact that you kind of need Superboy there. Um,
One of the things that I've liked, and I don't know when they did this, but at some point in the ensuing years, I probably because things got so complicated, they had the Legion go back and not meet Superboy, but meet a young Clark Kent and inspire him to become Superboy, which then they were inspired by the Superboy myth so that they become their own creator, which is a little, right?
yeah,
Doesn't that kind of blow your mind a little bit? Like that's next level meta in a way of where of like, oh, this hero has inspired me, but the hero wouldn't even exist if I hadn't inspired the person who became the hero. So I'm a self-made man kind of a thing. I don't know, like I said, I can't really pinpoint. I feel like I've seen that sort of a couple of times used, and I don't know who, so sorry whoever deserves credit for that, but I really thought that was interesting. Personally, being someone who is so ingrained in Legion lore, I never really cared how they came about. Like, do they have to be? Because there have been so many reboots. Like, one time it was sort of a teenage rebellion thing, right? Where the future was so utopian and sort of dull that nobody had anything to do, right? And then they built it out from there. And or maybe it's Superboy or then and later on it's going to be Valor, or
yeah,
it could just be the idea of different alien races working together for a common cause, this kind of thing. I never really got hung up on that too much. As long as they're there and they're working together, we can just move forward from there.
yeah.
So
I to be honest, I like them not being the Boy Scouts Clubhouse Legion. I mean, it makes sense if you're in the '70s and you find this Superboy artifact or whatever, and you look him up on your intergalactic encyclopedia. Like that's kind of cool. This is a different beast. I just wanted to open that discussion up with you, just to kind of get your thoughts on that.
I do want to say that when I was a kid, the Legion issues from way back that I liked the best, or the parts of the Legion stories that I liked the best, were when Superboy wasn't there or when he faded into the background. He took so much oxygen from the room, from the writers, because they would always sort of center him in the narrative. that it didn't give the other characters that I was actually interested in a chance to shine. I was already reading Superman. I already knew Superman. So to me, Superboy was more like a just a thinner Superman, right?
Yeah,
He's
yeah,
got this
yeah.
their characterizations are very, very similar. And Superman is a character that for me, at least when I was a kid, he worked well on his own. Like he was
It's
okay
tough
in
to
the
have him
Justice
in a
League.
team. And to be
Yeah.
frank, I quite liked it when is it like if Supergirl is stranded 2000 years in the future, that's cool. If Superboy can just go to the future whenever the Legion uses their dumb like radio receiver, that's kind of dumb.
Yeah.
I mean, it's great in its day, but it's sort of silly. And I know
And
these are
he's
comics and they're silly, but like,
especially back then. But
yeah,
when he's taking all the oxygen and so overpowered and whatnot, it's a little bit different than when you have someone like Mon-El, who is sort of a proxy Superboy who has the same powers, doesn't even necessarily have these outlandish, not outlandish, but sort of really set weaknesses, right? He doesn't have the lead poisoning problem anymore. The lead poisoning keeps him from losing his powers under a red sun. He doesn't have the kryptonite lack of immunity or whatever, so he's even more powerful
he's
than
just got
Superboy. But he's a different character. He has a different look. He's also sort of because of the way he was designed for me and my eye and the way I was as a kid, he has a more mature look, right? He doesn't have the
He's got a
big
lot of
insignia.
baggage. He's lived 1,000 years in the negative zone. What have you done? Like,
Yeah.
it's a
So I always preferred him so much more to Superboy, and I felt like the Legion was stronger. And when they finally divorced themselves from Superboy sometime in the 70s, and really went on their own, I felt like that's when the Legion really began to sing. Superboy would show up sometimes, even during the Levitz era. I feel like probably sometimes Superboy would show up, but they were really on their own, and I think that's when they came into their own. And so I always felt like Superboy, if anything, detracted with his presence. With his inspiration, that's a different thing. That's fine, but I feel like he could still be inspiring and not show up in the book and still, if you've got Superboy, they just would, shrinking Violet shrunk into the background,
yeah,
and what
yeah.
made the Legion so great was you had these different people working together with different characters and different personalities, and not just this one person that sold comics. Right, it was all an editorial money-making thing.
I could deal with Supergirl instead of getting sent. Her capsule gets put into stasis, and she arrives on Earth 2,000 years too late. And solved, problem solved. GC, you can give me some cash. I'll write you that. I'll
Yeah.
write you that tale. Like you don't need. It does the same thing. She'll be in the blanket with the Kal-El like symbol. It's all there. And
And why does that doesn't detract at all from what you're saying you want for present day Superman as the only Kryptonian, et cetera, et cetera.
yeah,
Like that still achieves everything that you're trying to go for.
indeed, maybe Time Trapper stuffed up the transit of
Mhm.
Kara's.
She could have been shunted into the pocket universe.
No,
So yeah, I mean, there were a lot of ways to go about this. They really did it in a convoluted way. It makes for an interesting story, and it makes for an interesting discussion.
we
And
are here 30 years later talking about this comic that this, unfairly maligned era. Um, Patrick, like the fact that we're doing that, sorry, Legion of Superheroes issue 4 is the best one that we've read so far.
oh, for sure, it's going to be difficult to rank because it is just a one-off story, but it it sets up. Excuse me, it sets up so much. I mean, I mean, he erases the whole timeline.
Yeah, no, I think it sets up basically the whole point of to why we would even bother to care about the Legion of Superheroes despite this dystopian setting. Now, to get into our top 10, it's going to be pretty tough. To get into the top five, so I'm just talking about top five is it better than the giant size X-Men one? Probably not, because it doesn't have the volume of characters and the explosion of ideas, but it does, as far as drama, it might be actually more dramatic than the actual plot of Giant Size X-Men, but maybe not as cool as the characters. And I'm just
The other thing
going
to
down.
keep in mind about that particular issue is that it stands on its own, whereas this is dependent on 30 years of backstories and
Yeah,
whatnot. Do you know what I mean? So
yeah.
it kind of cheats a little bit. I
So
do think it's probably better than the Kang arc, though.
yeah, this this makes me care. Like this
Hmm.
is the thing. This is the issue of Legion of Superheroes that has all the charismatic players on the table. They're doing things that are dramatical. I know Block was killed last week or last episode, but that's he's killed by some guy who I have no clue who that is. Like,
Just that he's crazy.
yeah, he's a nutter. This this sets that up, and then I know in the background, oh, we still haven't resolved this stuff. There's the Dominators. There's all that cool stuff still to come down the pike. So, Patrick, I'm just going to tell you. Just tell me when to stop. Better than the substitutes.
Yeah,
I think this is better than JLA Annual One.
which I convinced you to overrate, but yes, it's definitely better.
Okay. Well, it does have the tentacle scene, so you know. I think that this is better than Marvel Team Up 150.
Another one that was maybe unfairly propped up by nostalgia, but it's good.
Even with the nostalgia, this is better than Red Glass. Like,
Yes.
even though I love the Mr. Mitchell, like the museum thing is so cool.
Oh,
we're
so
gonna
good. Yes.
Kang is overrated, I think, just only because the promises didn't deliver. So I'm ranking this above
Agree.
Kang. Now, to get into the
Yes, I
top,
agree.
can I convince myself that this is a better product? Remembering this is not talking about Chris Claremont's entire X-Men over. Is this a better comic than Giant Size X-Men 1? Yes or no, Patrick?
The answer is no, but I have to say, you made sure to say that this is the Giant Size X-Men one from classic X-Men and not the original Giant Size X-Men one, which is better than the classic X-Men Giant Size
Yeah,
X-Men one. You follow that?
yeah,
But however, both are, in my opinion, stronger on their own than this individual issue. Yeah, I think so.
yeah. Had
You
this
can't
have been,
introduce those new X-Men so many, that's one of the things that really, because I look up and I see, oh, JLA Annual 2 up there. But you know what? JLA Annual 2 did the same thing. They introduced these new characters. They completely changed the face of the JLA. And not because of, what do you call them? Speculators, tech bros. Not because, oh, this is the first appearance of Vibe. Like, I don't give a crap about that. But that's when you're a kid, when you're an adult, when you're anybody, these new characters and their power sets. It's the same thing that we said about Kono for this Legion of Superheroes run that we're doing right now. That's the price of admission right there. These new characters, these things that are going to be seeds in our imaginations that we can think about going forward. That promise. That it's like when you I don't know if you get this, but when I hear a song by a singer that I love, and she turns out to be 21 years old, and I think I'm going to be able to enjoy 20 years of this woman singing song. Anytime she stumbles on a song that is well written, I'm going to enjoy this because I love her voice. And this is the same thing that we see when we introduce ourselves to a character like Nightcrawler.
Mhm.
So it's going to be hard to beat that. But comes in strong at 6 for me.
Yeah. If they had have made this a double-sized edition and got the creme de la creme from the first three issues and number four, it's gonna this that would have been top three for me. Just I would have really like loved
Oh,
that.
I'd put it above Universo Project easily if they could have tied in the rest of the stuff that was going on. Yeah.
Yeah.
But then they erased the timeline. So, like, going forward, we really don't know. They could have changed everything. But, like I said, I feel like we sort of end up going back to the status quo, except for whatever editorial wanted, which was Mon-El's no longer called Mon-El. Superboy and Supergirl and the Time Trapper, as we know them, never existed, and that includes the Pocket Universe. So,
Fantastic. So, Patrick, I'd like to thank you for the Legion of Superheroes history lesson. If you are a listener and you want more of that, like, follow, subscribe, leave some comments in the comments about what you want covered. but we're definitely pushing forward with our Legion coverage, and we've got some Avengers and some John Byrne, speaking of Superboy, down the pike. So we'd love to for you to tune in then. So we will see you next time. Thanks again.